Perhaps the happiest day of my life was when actually one of the happiest days of my life was when we heard that we will become free. And Viktor Orban is perhaps regarded as a naughty boy within the European Union because he does not accept many of the demands of a rather centralized bureaucracy that runs the European Union. So conservatives are not against the future, they are not future blind. On the contrary, they work by studying the past and by observing the present to make sense of what to do, what's the best or least risky solution to tackle the issues of the day and to go forward. A scientist does not have to sympathize with the moon to say something relevant about it. But we need to sympathize with the other if we want to say something about the other. And we are born into the smallest possible social unit, into the family. And that's why family is crucial. Without the family, we would die. That's as simple as that. The most important thing is that you have to do it for yourself. It's very important what the government does, but it's more important what your local mayor does and your neighbor does, and you yourself don't do.
Concepts with Sean Watley.
So I was really excited to have the opportunity to speak with Dr. Hörcher today. He's from Hungary, and for him and for others, I guess, in this European space, there is a very clear distinction between philosophical conservatism and classical liberalism. So often in North America, we confuse classical liberalism with conservatism. And it probably comes from the fusionism days of the 1980s, which we've discussed in other places. Now, to be clear, the European conservatism is not just simply about monarchy and aristocracy. No, it's an actual philosophical conservatism, and we get into some of the ideas that are baked into that. He is an expert on Roger Scruton. He knew Roger Scruton personally, and he's written books about him. He's also written 4 books on poetry, so he ties in his philosophy with aesthetics, and I think that's an important element that's often underappreciated in conservatism. But he also spends a great deal of time tying together the universal and the particular. So you remember in previous episodes, we've tried to tackle this, and one of my big worries is about modern liberals, especially our Prime Minister, Mark Carney, and his predecessor, Justin Trudeau. They tend to be champions of these universal values, and these values hover as abstractions in the middle of nowhere to be interpreted by whoever has the power to implement them. And so I've shared earlier that I think this worries me, and so we tackle that, and Dr. Hörcher does a great job of saying we need both, but we also really, really need a model, or to use his word, a heuristic or a framework through which we can interpret these grand ideas. If we don't, then we're just left with metaphysical abstractions. Anyways, I really enjoyed this podcast episode. I apologize, my nose is completely blocked. I'm just getting over a cold, but I hope you can take the time to enjoy it. Thanks for stopping by. All right, we have Dr. Ferenc Hörcher here, head of the Research Institute for Politics and Government of the LudoVica University of Public Service, Hungary. He's Senior Research Fellow of the Institute of Philosophy of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences. He studied in Budapest, Oxford, Brussels, has written widely, and I'm excited to have him here. Welcome, Professor.
I'm very happy to be with you.
Thank you. So I was telling some of my friends that I have the opportunity to speak with a professor in Hungary on the podcast, and Hungary has some fans in Canada and North America. So I'm just wondering if you could tell us where you are situated right now, and whether we can give you the credit for all the good things the Hungarian government is doing, or are you not connected with them at all?
Well, welcome everyone. I'm very happy to be part of this program, and I'm really excited about the discussion. I had some friends in Canada as well, so that's one of the reasons. Actually, when I was in Oxford, a friend of mine was there studying, and we played very good tennis on the grass covered tennis courts in Oxford. But we also had the debates as well, philosophical debates. So as for the question, I am a professor and head of the Research Institute for Politics and Government, as you mentioned, at LudoVica University, which is a university of public service. It's like the École Nationale d'Administration in France. So its purpose is to help the educational programs of civil servants. But my unit is a research unit, and it is basically, reading and writing. That's our job, and also to discuss issues of the day, like this event that you invited to me. So that's my profile. I am a university professor. And no connection with our government. But of course, whenever I go abroad, people keep asking me, how about Hungary? Of course, Hungary is a post-communist country, as most of your viewers would know, which means that we had more than 40 years of Russian communist occupation, which ended in 1990 when there was a free election, and with that started a new era in Hungarian politics. And although I was born in '64, so I have direct experiences of the communist regime, perhaps the happiest day of my life was when actually one of the happiest days of my life was when we heard that we will become free. And since then, of course, we are taking the bumpy roads of liberty, which is not an easy exercise for a community, even for a smaller communities. Hungary is in Central Europe. It used to be part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire before World War I, when it was a middle power, but since then, after the Trianon decision, which took away 2/3 of the country's territory and 1/3 of its population, we are a small country. And as a small country, we were not always on the making the best choices. In fact, we made tragical mistakes, like joining Hitler's coalition in the Second World War, which led to the fall of liberty in this country, and also the lost life of more than 500,000 of Hungarian Jews. So that's a tragic history, after which came the Russian takeover and the Russian communist empire, which was built out in this part of the world. And we are still suffering some of its impacts, because of course that meant that people got out of practice of how to run free elected government and regime smoothly on the long term. So we are still practicing it. But one specific example is the government that we have right now, which is in power from 2010. So it's more than or something like 15 years in power by now, and that's the government of Viktor Orbán and the party Fidesz. And they earlier called themselves conservatives. By now, I think they would call themselves a nationalist and sovereignist direction as far as their political choices or values are concerned. And Viktor Orbán is perhaps regarded as a naughty boy within the European Union, because he does not accept many of the demands of a rather centralized bureaucracy that runs the European Union. And therefore there are huge debates in the European Parliament as well as in the European Committee, and at home as well. We are going to have our next national election in 2026, and by now he has got a challenger, and we will see what will come out of that in next year's election.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, we wish you the best on that election for sure. Having just experienced election here in Canada, many of us, a close election, many of us were not too happy about the outcome. But anyways, you mentioned liberty, and we're going to talk about your book coming out this fall on conservatism. Can you just say a few brief words on the connection between conservatism and liberty? Many people feel that liberty and liberalism are owned by the liberal parties and the advocates for philosophical liberalism. So just say a few brief remarks about liberty and conservatism.
Sure. Of course, modern ideologies were formulated after the French Revolution, and one of the leading ones was liberalism, which, as you mentioned, put on its flag the idea of liberty after the French Revolution's liberté. But of course, conservatives are not against liberty. They are against the revolutionary practice that was followed in the French Revolution, and the founding father of conservatism, at least as far as intellectual conservatism is concerned, was Edmund Burke, an Irishman who worked at Westminster and who was a terrific writer as well on his own rank. And what he pointed out was that in fact British liberty was in danger as a result of the revolutionary spirit that spread all over Europe, and that led to actual wars in Europe within a few years after the breakout of the revolution. And in Britain there were supporters for the sort of subversive politics that was associated with the French Revolution. And Burke was quite explicitly against all sorts of innovations, which are risky because they are based on violence and the transformation of the whole societal structure and the political regime, and no one knows what the end of it will come out. As he was right in foreseeing in the French case, because there the most radical revolutionary parties gave then way to the tyranny of Napoleon the First, and then with that it caused a whole disaster for the whole continent. And in that respect, conservatives, rather than taking over the revolutionary idea of liberty that comes with the French Revolution, they are in favor of a constrained form of liberty, something which depends on the rule of law as opposed to the rule of individual rulers, like the revolutionaries, or like a military leader like Napoleon. The rule of law, which is based on the constitutional customs of a given community, as in Britain, since the Bill of Rights and Habeas Corpus and Magna Carta, there is a long tradition on which they could build. And the conservatives, as far as the Anglo-Saxon conservatism is concerned, are believing and trusting that tradition and long-term experience is a better guide in political affairs than innovation and utopian schemes.
Brilliant. Yeah. So you're already into the content of your book that's coming out. This is a perfect segue. And so you've co-edited a volume with Daniel Pitt. He's a British academic. And the title is Intellectual Conservatism from Burke to Scruton. And people who aren't deep into political philosophy might not realize that the fact that you injected that word intellectual right into the title is actually something provocative. Many of us in North America especially almost pride ourselves on being anti-intellectual and keeping a distance from the academy. So I'm wondering, and your introduction also, you tackled this issue of intellectual conservatism. Why did you think it was necessary to have that in the title and to put a whole book together on connecting intellectualism and conservatism?
Yes, before answering your question, let me introduce my co-editor, Daniel Pitt, who is a younger colleague from Britain. We work together at the University of Hull, which has a Center for British Politics, where I am a senior fellow. And the same institution established a Center for Conservatism Studies, led by Christopher Fear. And we had a joint project by now for years with them, organizing conferences 2 times in Budapest, 1 time in Cambridge, and this year it's going to be at Grand Rapids, co-organized by and hosted by the Kirk Center in the US. So that's the institutional background to the volume. As for the substance of your question, the volume addresses the issue of intellectual conservatism, and indeed with that we are breaking new grounds in a way, because because conservatives used to be quite proud to be cautious or cautious with intellectuals, and also kind of suspicious of them, because most of the novel directions in politics and most of the experiments which led to disastrous effects, actually, beside the aforementioned French Revolution, in the 19th century there came at least 3 waves of revolutions for France only, and then the 20th century brought with it the totalitarian regimes. If you take all of that, behind all of that you see intellectuals who were kind of set up new schemes to try to realize them in real life, and that's why conservatives, when they try to avoid violence, when they try to avoid unfounded experiences or experiments in order to have something which might come true or might not. So they are suspicious of intellectuals, they are suspicious of us. And that's why it needed a certain courage to claim that even conservatives need intellectual background. And I'm sure that even your friends who are so curious about what the term might mean have got bookshelves like you have in their bags, which means that they are also intellectuals on their own rank, and that's what we want to point out, that there is no politics without intellectual stature and intellectual work done. And in fact, at the moment, British conservatism is quite on the ground. You mentioned the Canadian government and the last election when the Conservatives failed. In many respects, I guess that there is a need for intellectual work in the background before success comes out. And in fact, here in Hungary, we had that experience as well. Viktor Orban had his first government in 98 to 2002. So that was the first 4 years when he was in power, and then he lost the power for 8 years and had to think what went wrong. And actually one of the problems for them as well until quite recently was that they underestimated the relevance of intellectual work in conservatism as well. And we based our own argument in favor of it on the work of Roger Scruton, who was a recently died British philosopher and perhaps the major voice of intellectual conservatism. And he was happy to admit that he was an intellectual, so he was not a practical politician, but a man of ideas. But he thought that he had a lot to say to actual political figures and political regimes as well. He was quite critical first with the Thatcher regime and then with all the other regimes that came after that. He was in favor of the Brexit, and he was quite critical about the European Union, of course. So it's his example which gave us the courage and the impetus to go on with it. I worked with Roger on a number of events, and Daniel Pitt was one of his late students. So we had personal experiences as well, and that helps when you try to understand the full meaning of a life's achievement that Roger has actually done by producing more than 50 books in his life.
Yeah, wow. I'm very jealous that you got to work directly with Roger Scruton. Certainly, he's a huge hero of mine. Something he said in an interview once, he said a conservative intellectual works to find reasons for people who don't need reasons. And so I'm wondering if you could, I'm sure you've turned your mind to this, the notion that conservatism almost tries to touch into things that are beyond capturing in language. And so is it even possible to have a conservative philosophy? Is it almost an, people will describe it as being an anti-ideology, or it's only a disposition. It can't have the same kind of content and propositional nature rather, of liberalism. And so, you've written 4 books on poetry. Poetry tries to get at information that is beyond what we can capture in a rationalistic sense. So have I given you enough runway there to try to get at this idea that conservatism addresses topics that are beyond expression in many ways? And so is this project of trying to develop an intellectual basis for a conservative movement doomed to failure from the start?
No. to answer in a short form, no. I don't agree with you. But I try to argue for it as well, if you don't mind. First of all, let us distinguish between philosophy and ideology. There are different schools within conservatism, and one of the major criticisms against Scruton himself, and because of that also later when I wrote my book on him, against me as well, was that he becomes an ideologue of conservatism. That was the major criticism of the Oakeshott followers who were participants of a circle around Oakeshott at the London School of Economics. And Michael Oakeshott is perhaps the best known 20th century defender of traditional British conservatism. That criticism, I think, is mistaken because it mixes up ideology and philosophy. Ideology is also consists of ideas, but there it's like for the use of direct transplant into practice, into politics. You can think about Marxism like an example, or the Frankfurt School in Germany, which actually prepared ideas for direct application. Philosophy is not like that. Philosophy is doing a very simple thing, which actually all of us do in their own life, which is to try to make sense of one's life and tries to find meaning in human nature. And actually, all that you described, that there is something hidden which cannot be explained by words, were words that you used to express that. So it's absolutely possible to describe that sort of attitude as you did, which is indeed different from almost all the other ones, like we mentioned liberalism or socialism, communism, or the Nazi regime's ideology, or simple nationalism. All of them have got well-defined targets, concepts that they claim should be the final aim of politics. Now, of course, conservatism does not have that sort of final aims to put on their flags. On the other hand, it has got a very well-established practice, and one can describe that practice if philosophically trained. And that was what Scruton was. He was a Cambridge-educated philosopher of art who had a doctoral thesis and a doctoral degree in general philosophy of art, and in particular in the works of imagination in art. And what he did was to describe what we are doing when we are conservatives, as opposed to the others who are following, the ideas, the targets that they have pointed out. What we do is rather to look back and try to see where we come from, and try to make sense of the circumstances that we are confronting, and this way to try to find out what is the best, or at least the least problematic solution for politics. In this regard, I used to refer to a painting by the famous Venetian painter Titian, who has got this painting on the virtue of prudence, the allegory of prudence. And that allegory has three faces. One of an old man looking backwards, one a middle-aged man looking on the viewer, and a young one looking forward. And these three faces express the three different directions that conservatives need to confront. We as conservatives need to see where we come from, what was our past, who were our forefathers, and what were their major achievements, in order to be able to confront the present situation. The most important thing, anyhow, is to confront the present situation and make sense of it. What are the challenges? What are the risks? And that way to find out what is the best way to proceed. And in that respect, by making sense of the present moment, we are able to build up strategies for the future. So conservatives are not against the future, they are not future blind. On the contrary, they work by studying the past and by observing the present to make sense of what to do, what's the best or least risky solution to tackle the issues of the day and to go forward.
Yeah, great. So you've jumped into your book here that I have right in my hands. It's called A Political Philosophy of Conservatism, Prudence, Moderation, and Tradition. And I've been enjoying that. And the picture that you describe is on page 94 of Titian's allegory of prudence. But before I let you off the hook, that was a beautiful answer, and I agree with you. But with all my guests, I'm trying to look for things that maybe we could disagree on a bit. I'm joking. I don't think I disagree with you.
No, it's a disagreement. We have to agree to disagree. As
that's right. That's right.
Yes.
So on page 110 in your book on prudence, I was so excited that I found your reference. It's in your section on the knowledge constraint, and you talk about Michael Polanyi's reconsider in his great book, Personal Knowledge. And I believe a line from him is that we know more than we can tell. And a quote that you use from him, he talks about the skillful knowing and doing. And then you also mention Merleau-Ponty and his phenomenology. Knowledge in the hands is his quote. And in the same section, you talk about Hayek, and then you talk about Oakeshott as well. And they all are in this section on knowledge constraint and how we're almost trying to get at things. To your point, we use words to try to unpack this knowledge that seems to go beyond words. But so before I let you off the hook, can I get you to expand a bit on this idea that conservatism is actually trying to wrestle with things that maybe we have to admit are sometimes beyond wrestling with? Not to say that they don't exist, but it's something that may even be beyond our mental ability to comprehend. But we still need to wrestle with it, and we still need to try to find words to describe it. Or have I misconstrued what you were saying in the knowledge constraint section there?
Well, of course, maybe we should start out from the basic assumption of the book, which is that human beings are constrained in more than one way. And the knowledge constraint is one of the major ones. I also deal with the temporal constraint and the agency constraint. That we are fallen beings, that we don't have enough time to work out all the details of a good strategy. And as you mentioned, we don't have enough knowledge for that. But yes, of course, there are forms of knowledge that are not conceptualized. So the basic example that for example, Oakeshott mentions is riding a bicycle, but it could as well be riding a horse, just to come closer to your country. I think that indeed, well, actually in Hungary we had got very good horsemen earlier, but not by now. The thing is that these are, physical exercises, physical practices that you don't do by first learning the rules and then try to apply those rules for the actual practice. Or take cooking. You can buy as many books on cooking as you want. They will not make you a good cook if you don't have a good taste, if you don't have the patience, if you don't have special informal knowledges or unreflected forms of knowledges, which is all important in human life. A lot of things are happening with us without which when we don't reflect on them, we just actually do it. Like in conversation, they say that 90% of the conversation is beyond the words. So indeed, like if your viewer look at me and the screen where they can see me, they look at my clothes, my room, the way I try to speak English, all of that contribute to an impression, and they make a judgment on that. And the same way we make judgments on practical affairs, on works of art, that's the aesthetic judgment, which is based on our impressions and most of the time in an unreflective manner. At least if we are not practitioners like professors of art or artists ourselves. And the same is true about politics. Our political judgments are made on impressions that sometimes we cannot really make sense of or undig. They are there, and we happen to learn that we are conservatives, we are socialists, we are revolutionaries, whatever we are. And that's because the human being, the life of a human being, is not based on simply rational arguments and rational decisions. Most of our decisions are made on a customary basis. Why? Because we don't have enough time for making rational arguments pro and contra and try to establish it, as Habermas argues. This German Marxist philosopher claimed that in fact what we would need to do is to debate all the time and try to find the best solution after all the arguments were heard and weighed. And that's of course nonsense. We don't have time for that. So we do make judgments on the practical grounds, on customary ways, relying on our habits and customs. And that's where the wisdom of the community comes in, because these habits and customs come from others. We are born into a family and we are brought up within a particular community. And the family is within a settlement, and the settlement is within a national culture, as we say today. So that's why we need to take into account the unreflective. But that does not mean that we cannot have a philosophical account of what is happening here. I just gave you a philosophical description of how non-reflective judgments are made, and that's this is a division of labor. We, or maybe the different spheres of our lives, as a human being, each of us make judgments on these practical grounds without much, reflecting and arguing. And there are certain moments where we have to make, arguments and excuses and explanations for our deeds. And there are certain jobs, like that of the philosopher or the intellectual, who tries to make sense on it on a community level as well, and also historically. So both on temporal and spatial grounds more widely, and tries to give accounts of what is happening. Why is one country more successful than the other? Why is one generation keeping mistakes and why not the other? So that's how I see it. It's not a contradiction. You are right that there are those elements in our political life, but I claim I am also right, as was Scruton, when we claim that there is a need to reflect on that, because that helps to sort out things that the individual might not be able to do in their own constrained life. And even a political party does not necessarily have for that the personnel and the time to do it, and that's why there is a need for background work on the part of the intellectuals.
Brilliant answer. That was very good. And I wanted to connect something related to that. You talk about in your section on late modern prudentia. You mentioned a writer that I was embarrassed that I hadn't heard of, Hans Gadamer, and his work Truth and Method. And on page 59, I think Helmholtz is defining how Gadamer uses the concept of tact. And you quote this: "By tact, we understand a special sensitivity and sensitiveness to situations and how to behave in them, for which knowledge from general principles does not suffice." End quote. And so I wonder if you had a few comments about philosophical hermeneutics. I just thought this was a wonderful term. I've been saying recently, I've been arguing against our current prime minister. He wrote a book called Values, and he loves these it seems to be, in my reading of it, that he's promoting these metaphysical abstractions. Burke's language is, we need to avoid the nakedness and solitude of metaphysical abstractions. Mm-hmm. And yet our prime minister's written a whole book on it. And so I've been arguing that we need history as a tool, or as a hermeneutic, if you will, to push mm-hmm. back against these metaphysical abstractions. And I'm wondering, is that what Gadamer was saying? Or I'm sure he was saying much more mm-hmm. than that, but I was very excited to see you reference Gadamer and the concept of tact in mm-hmm. helping us sort out particular situations.
Mm-hmm. Well, Sean, I think you are a good reader, if you allow me to say so, because you picked out a sentence which is crucial to the matter and the closest to my heart, actually. So,
wow.
Congratulations. Yes, indeed, Gadamer becomes more and more important for me. Hans-Georg Gadamer was born in 1900 and died 2002 or so. So he had a tremendously long life. And he was a student of Heidegger, of Martin Heidegger, probably one of the most influential 20th century continental philosophers, and one who was actually, in one part of his life, also a member of the Nazi Party. Now, Gadamer was a student of him in the 20s, before he joined the party, and he always kept himself distinct from the master's political views. But hermeneutics is indeed a very important philosophical movement on which Gadamer worked based on his knowledge of what Heidegger taught him, but beyond Heidegger. Hermeneutics, as understood by Gadamer, is the art of interpretation. How we make sense of a statement, how we make sense of a poem, how we make sense of a book like you did with my book. And his idea is that when we read, for example, a text, what we do is to initiate a conversation with the author. And we try to make sense of what she is after. And of course, most of the time, we will not be able to actually decipher the real sense of the text. But we can get closer and closer to it if we listen carefully. And and that listening carefully also imply the sort of tactfulness that Gadamer takes over from Helmholtz. What is this tact? It's a sort of understanding, Verstehen, that's the German term, which is based on sympathy, and based on the sympathy of one individual towards the other. So it's an individualized form of sympathy, and sympathy means to be able to feel oneself in the position of the other, and to imagine what the world looks like from that perspective. And that is tactfulness. If someone is crying in the street, you walk by and you try to understand what is happening in her, and try to sympathize with her, and you see that it must be painful, and therefore you want to help. That's the sort of caritas, charity, that is behind the concept in the Christian tradition. But it goes back also to the ancient Greek ideas. If you look at the Greek tragedies like Philoctetes, you remember there again how human suffering invites a kind of understanding which is also compassionate, which means to suffer with the other. And that sort of understanding is required in the human world. It's unlike a scientific investigation. A scientist does not have to sympathize with the moon to say something relevant about it. But we need to sympathize with the other if we want to say something about the other. And that's why it's crucial not only to have abstract ideas, because abstract ideas don't have feelings, they don't have personal identity, they don't have the dignity. We human beings have ideas, but we also have a personal identity, a singular life that is destined to fall, and therefore it is that of a fallible creature, and we cannot help but sympathize with the other if we have that sort of being tuned on the other. And that is tactfulness, the first prerequisite in a society. We can only have long-lasting and cohesive societies if we have got that sort of tactfulness towards the other, and that requires culture. And culture is the way that we get accustomed and familiarize ourselves with our community's basic values as injected into customs and habits, personal habits and social customs. We learn it, and through that learning process we become agents who can be responsible for their actions, because we know what the consequences of our actions can be for the others.
Brilliant, brilliant. And you've offered a number of tangents on education. I have a passion there too, but I'm not going to go down that path just yet. I wanted to, so you mentioned our tactfulness is directed towards a particular other person, and one of the conversations or topics that I've been circling around for the last several episodes is this tension between the universal and the particular. And I know in some of your conferences, I believe it was, Professor Blond, Philip Blond, likes to talk about universalism, and we shouldn't abandon universalism to the liberals, and yet I've been saying I worry about universalism, and I think the only way to avoid metaphysical abstractions is to emphasize our rootedness in the particular. You mentioned Christianity. Even Christianity is a historical particular that develops from a particular event 2,000 years ago. And so how do you sort out, you actually do sort it out in this book at the closer to the front. You say we need both, we need the universal and the particular. But I'm wondering if you could make a few comments on that and just to resolve this, or shed some light on this tension between the need for the particular, but not in a way that leads to relativism, and then also the caution that we need if we're thinking of the universal. At least that's the way I'm seeing it. But how do you sort out the tension between the universal and the particular?
Well, that's a very important question again, and one that needs a lot of time to discuss. But let me try to give a short form of it. I approach this issue from the perspective of a Christian Aristotelian. And as a Christian Aristotelian, I first of all share Aristotle's understanding of the zone politikon, of the political animal, which is that we are born into the smallest possible social unit, into the family. And that's why family is crucial. Without the family, we would die. That's as simple as that. And if we understand that this is the first step in our life, the first experience connects us to the family, then Aristotle leads us further and claims that families come together to solve certain issues that they cannot solve alone, and that's the level of the settlement of the village. And then the villages will work together because there are, external enemies, there are natural disasters, and so on. So they need the polis, a political community, and that's the largest, most complex unit that Aristotle wants to talk about. He does not mention actually empire, although he was the master of Alexander the Great, who was building one of the great empires of the age. But he does not address it there. We could think about it, but it's beyond the point for the moment. From Aristotle, we can learn that there are these levels of communal attachments, that we belong to the family, we belong to our settlement, and we belong to our nation. And then the next thing that you can learn is from Christianity. And I approach Christianity from a Catholic's point of view because I was raised in Catholicism. And according to that scheme again, believers are not alone. We are church members, but as church members, we are also members of a small community, a small local community within the church. We are not just one in an ocean, but one in a small pond. That's perhaps the closest that we can get in a simile like that. So Christianity again gives the same framework, that there is the small, there is the individual, you as a rational agent who knows about yourself. And then that individual is connected to different levels of community, the local, the middle level, middle layer, the settlement, or the larger units, and then the final one is the nation, as far as the Aristotelian concept is concerned. And in the same way, in the church, the local church affiliation, and then your membership in a universal church. And that's, I think, how you can understand the abilities of the human being. And indeed, we had recently this discussion between J.D. Vance and then only Bishop Provost or Cardinal Provost about Ordo Amoris, about the issue how we should love perfectly. And I think that both of them were right on their own rank. Vance arguing that it is natural to human beings to have stronger feelings for those attachments which are on the local level, on the smaller or closer or more direct level, and our love for the others are by nature less colorful and less demanding. On the other hand, Cardinal Prevost reminded us that in fact what we are as human beings are part of humanity, and all of us have the same sort of dignity without exception, including serious killers. So the thing is that we as human beings have our dignity, and that requires the equal love of your neighbor demand that Jesus taught us. So these are the two aspects of the particular and the universal, as I understand it.
Yeah, brilliant. So do you think, maybe I'll put you on the spot, you don't have to answer this, but do you think Philip Blond is going too far then in saying we need to keep hold of the universal, and as conservatives we need to make universalism a central pillar of our political philosophy?
Philip is working on a book on empire, and I'm looking forward to that book because I think that will be quite a powerful argument against partly Christian nationalism and partly the sort of national conservatism that Yoram Hazan defends. Those are different traditions, and I think that we should cherish all our traditions, and conservatism is a multi-faced and multicultural society in itself. So we should keep we should keep an eye on all of them and honor them. And of course, we make our judgments, and we cannot help but make our judgments, and we see the merits of each, and for ourselves we try to choose the best possible ones. But in this respect, I am in debate with Philip. But I think that of course we can learn from those who we are debated with. So in that sense, I'm looking forward to his book.
That was a very diplomatic answer. You should run for political office. You're very good at answering hard questions. That's very good.
No, I'm very hard at I'm very hard as far as diplomacy is concerned. But I'm good at what a teacher has to do.
Yes.
Which is to try to understand what the other says and try to react on it by providing one's own point of view without negating the other's personality.
Yes.
So and that in that respect, I always try to find what is relevant in the other point of view, because that makes my answer more nuanced and also more tactful. So that's the demand of prudence. You mentioned my book as a book on prudence. It's actually a book on conservatism, but you are right that that book on conservatism is based on two basic virtues, and the first one, the most important for me in that book, is prudence, practical wisdom, and in particular the practical wisdom of the politician.
Yeah.
But there is another one, actually, moderation as well, and maybe moderation has a part to play in my own strategies, rhetorical strategies, or art of interpretation, or hermeneutics with the Gadamer's expression.
Beautiful. Yeah, great answer. So we're almost at the end of the time I promised you here, and I wanted to ask one last question. You mentioned that in Hungary, with Viktor Orban, there was a time where they had to reconsider and try to reconnect with the deep ideas behind philosophical conservatism. How do we do that? So in my field, I come from a medical background. We have people who are very well educated in a narrow field, but even to talk to them about episteme, phronesis, techne, many of them haven't even read Aristotle at all. And indeed, I wasn't trained. I had to read this over the last 20 years. So how do we go from your knowledge, and you're writing multiple books on Scruton and political philosophy and intellectual conservatism, how can we get the average well-informed reader, intellectual, but in a broader sense, to engage with these ideas? Where should they start? Do you have any books to suggest? Or I often offer Roger Scruton's little book, Conservatism: An Invitation to the Great Tradition, as a place to start. But where do you tell people to start?
Well, of course, if you are a Canadian and you ask a question like this, I would answer, don't ask a Hungarian how to do that. That's the first precautionary remark, I would say, because the most important thing is that you have to do it for yourself. I was a student in Oxford when Isaac Berlin, the famous historian of ideas, was still around.
Wow!
And he was born in a small Baltic state, and had to leave his country when the Russians took it over, and the Russian Revolution just swept away all what was the past of that small country. And he was a professor at All Souls College. And I went up to ask him the sort of question that now you ask me. And that was in 87 or 88 when I was a student at Oriel College, Oxford. And this very kind man, he was quite ready to meet me and discuss issues. But when I asked this polite question, what should we do with our Russian enemies occupying our country? How can we return to normality? How can we have a free and and autonomous country, he said that, well, young man, you have to do it yourself. Don't ask me, it's your job to do it. So that's the first lesson to learn, that you can only work from your own material. That's what is available for you. On the other hand, of course, you are quite right to ask the question from what you read, how can I adopt that? And I think that's where your tactfulness will come into play. So if you are the sort of person who have already built up the sort of experience, habits and customs that belong to your community, then you will be able to decipher what is important in that message for your particular community at the particular moment of time, because there the temporal dimension is crucial. That's what is called kairos by the ancient Greeks. And without actually finding the right time, you will never hit the target. Timing is important, and of course the sort of knowledge that is required is important, but as you mentioned, it's most of the time it's implicit knowledge, and that's something that you cannot learn by rules. You can practice it. So come together with your friends and try to find out how to keep in order your single street, the square that is closest to you, the play fields for your kids, and come together and enjoy yourself with the others and learn the others as it used to be the case before COVID, before the smartphone, and try to find time to spend with the others in the pub, discussing the local issues. It's very important what the government does, but it's more important what your local mayor does and your neighbor does, and you yourself don't do. So in that sense, I'm in favor of what I call urban conservative republicanism, which is the idea that we all in our own settlement are citizens of small republics. The city, the street, or the quarter where we live, they all depend on our responsible participation in the life of that community. That's where you have your job to do, and through that, with the small little platoons that Edmund Burke works out, you can build up larger communities of comradeship and working together with the others, which is the foundation of a national renaissance or the reinvention of your own constitutional tradition that each of us, each of our countries have in their golden days.
Wow, that is just fantastic. That urban conservative republicanism. What a beautiful place to end our discussion. Dr. Hörcher, thank you so much for making this time. You've how many books have you written now too?
I did not count.
You did not count. At least, 10 or something like that. So lots more books for me to read. I appreciate the work that you've done. I appreciate your time here now with us. And I look forward to perhaps we'll meet someday at a conference. And thank you for the work you're doing on this. I really, really, really appreciate it.
I am really honored by your invitation, and I hope that your audience will have questions after our discussions. And please tell them that if they want, they can contact me by my university email, which is available. And I'm really looking forward to Reborn Canada.
Thank you so much. Great. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you indeed. The same to you.
Bye now.